Hello, listeners. I'd like to welcome Mr. Garner and his wife, Mrs. Garner, a wheat farming couple that experienced the ups and downs of the Great War. Along with them, we also have Mr. Wise, a member of the Canadian Parliament. I hope you're all doing well today. I have some questions to ask you, starting with Mr. Garner. How was life on the farm before the Great War? Well, thank you for having us. Life was getting hard as a wheat farmer. We had a drought that failed three of our crops. The price of wheat was at an all-time low, and we were seeing a unheard of amount of competition. If I'm being honest, it felt like our jobs were being washed out. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what we were going to do. We just kept working as hard as we could, and we were hoping for a miracle to happen. Oh wow! So it wasn't doing well. You guys were struggling. Um, Let me ask you this: when you heard that the war was happening, what was your initial reaction? Well, sir, if I'm being completely honest with you, I saw it as a negative thing at first. I wasn't up to the idea of sacrificing our young men for people that lived an ocean away. Um, Eventually, after some thought, I realized that it might be able to give our jobs some aid. The news explained how our allies would be demanding lots of food, and we were the perfect ones to give it to them. After thinking about it, overall, I was hopeful. How you would feel that way? Mrs. Garner, can I ask you this question? When the first soldiers started leaving, what surprised you the most?
What caught us off guard was the overwhelming excitement that the community was showing towards the war. People seemed like it was the best thing in the world, and were more than happy to throw big going-away parties. I didn't have this feeling, though. I was scared for the safety of the men. I didn't know if they realized what they were going into, and was very fearful for their safety.
Oh, I see. Well, it's nice to hear that there were people thinking about the safety of the soldiers. The big question here, the reason we had you on this show, was what was the outcome for you guys as wheat farmers? What changed? Well, when it first started, it was slow as always. But as time went on, the demand for our wheat was starting to overwhelm us. It was happening just as we thought it would. The prices for wheat tripled, and our farm plot doubled in size. We ended up having to hire new farm help, and we could pay them great wages. Everybody seemed to be benefiting. What we didn't like was when the government started docking our pay on the grounds of we were making too much money. Oh, very interesting. So you guys started to get taxed a lot. Mr. Wise, can I ask you a question here? Why were those income taxes put in, and was the idea that you guys were trying to profit on the war? Hello. To your question of were you trying to profit on the war, I have to say that you can't be any more wrong. The Canadian government had put over $600 million into the war at the time the income tax was implemented. And for the reason that the farmers and farm helpers were taxed so much was because of the amount of money that they were making compared to our brave men fighting overseas. A farmhand was making, on average, double of what one of our soldiers were making. This was a problem because the men fighting were feeling as if they weren't being compensated fairly. The war was a time that the government called on all of our country, and we were wanting to make people feel as if they were being treated fairly. And one way of doing that was taxing the people that weren't fighting on the front lines. Interesting. So, now another question for Mr. Garner. There is an exemption put in place for people involved in farming. The idea behind it was so you could stay home and provide food for the soldiers and our allies. Were you for this idea? Overall, yes, I was for the idea. It made sense at the time that I was most valuable at home-growing food. I aided our troops in the ways that I could, and I thought that it was going to stay that way. until the exemption was lifted and I was drafted. Ah, I'm aware of this. Mr. Wise, why was the exemption lifted? Well, unfortunately, the exemption was lifted due to an unfortunate number of casualties. We were not expecting to lose as many men as we did, and it came to a point where we could no longer protect our farmers, and we had to use them as soldiers. It was very unfortunate what happened, but we wouldn't have called on them if we didn't need them to do so. Yes, very, very unfortunate. Mrs. Garner, after your husband left for the war, what did you do?
After he left, I jumped into action and took on as much responsibility as I could handle. I started working around a farm with our boys, and we kept our operation running. We got help from local young boys, and we did what we needed to do. On top of that, I also worked with other women in the community, and we helped raise money for relief efforts. And by the time my husband got home from fighting, we'd sent over 4,000 crates of food and clothes. Although I wasn't on the front lines, I did everything that I could do in hopes that the men came home alive.
That's truly wonderful. You guys played your part. Now, Mr. Garner, I have another question for you. When you came back home, what was different? Well, the government offered us a plot of land and access to a $2,500 loan. We were among the lucky ones to have had a farm before the war, so we sold the plot of land and denied the loan because we'd been able to save up money while the war was happening. Although we were doing okay, others were not. The price of wheat dropped significantly, and those people trying to farm on the land that was given to them had a hard time making money from it. They took out loans to build their homes, but were not able to pay them back. It was an unfortunate situation for many families. The regrowth was slow, and some people never fully recovered. The children that lost their families were put at a disadvantage, and their now widows are struggling to raise the families. The effect of the war was clearly visible to anyone that went looking, unfortunately. Wow, that really is a horrible situation. Mr. Wise, should anything have been done differently? Unfortunately, I do not believe so. We had tried our best, but war is war. War is not good, and the results were very unfortunate. One thing we can do now is to never forget and honor those who have sacrificed not only their way of life, but their lives. That is a very good point, and I believe that we should not forget. Thank you for those who are listening in on the show, and thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Garner for coming in and showing their story. Also, thank you to Mr. Wise for coming in. We'll see you next week.